So Melius is a mod collection that focuses on turning Starfield into a more hardcore survival type of experience. So what does that mean? Buzzwords aside. Well, as always, the list adds a lot of mods and I'm not able to cover every single one of them because as of now, MO2 says that it's 393 mods that are active, so almost 400, which unfortunately is just way too many mods for me to cover on an individual basis, right? So instead what I'm going to do is I'll focus on the big core mods and the changes that it makes to the game and kind of give you a general idea of what the collection is trying to achieve, the direction. And then based on that, you can decide if this is for you or not, because it's definitely not going to be for everybody. That's what I'll say right off the bat. This is probably my favorite, or at the very top, either first or second favorite mod collection right now for Starfield. I love it. But it does tend to appeal a little bit more to a niche of people that like that hardcore survival type of experience, which is not the general public. A lot of stuff here you might find annoying. The good news is that it's very customizable, so if there's one or another thing that you don't like and you want to keep everything else, you can enable, disable things to your liking. You can change whatever you want. Alright, so let's just start off by focusing on probably the most important aspect of the things that it changes, which is the combat. And boy, does it change the combat a lot, for the better. There is a lot to cover here when it comes to the combat specifically, so forgive me if I kind of go on a rant here, but I think it's important for you to know everything that it does, because a lot of these mods that it uses are custom. They're made by the actual author of the collection. So first off, it's using its own enemy AI overhaul done by the actual author El Jefe. And you know, I'm just gonna say, I've used a lot of these different enemy overhauls and stuff. A lot of them you can't really even tell that any change has really been made. With this, you can actually really tell. I feel personally that he did a very good job. What this does is it changes the enemy behavior, right? So enemies are going to try to flank you, they're going to dodge, they're going to take proper cover, and overall they're going to feel a lot less dumb. It's going to feel a lot more alive. It's also using a mod called Bedlam, which is a dungeon randomizer, and generally speaking, what this mod is trying to do is it's trying to add a little bit more, not even life, it's trying to add more random elements that feel more natural to the game. So it'll do things such as randomizing the number of enemies, randomizing their location, and the dungeons in general, because a big complaint a lot of people have is that Starfield dungeons start feeling the same, right? After a while of playing the game, it feels like you kind of know where to expect an enemy to be, everything starts looking the same. This kind of helps randomize things, so even if I guess the interiors might look similar, a lot of things are not where you would expect them to be. So it changes things up to keep the surprise going, I guess. And then it also does a lot of other interesting stuff, such as allowing your enemies to be able to call reinforcements, changing the behavior of the opponents based on their faction, like the Crimson Fleet is more aggressive, whereas other factions are going to be more on the defensive, right? So when you're assaulting one of their bases or something, they're going to be using long-range weapons and they're going to hold their position type of thing. It changes their strategy, allows them to call for reinforcements, and actually adds random assaults too, which is really cool. I think it's something like a 10% chance or something like that, where if you're in the middle of combat, there is a possibility that the faction you're fighting with gets assaulted by another faction or by like wildlife. As you can see here from the footage that I'm showing, as an example, this is one of the first missions of the game where you're rescuing Barrett from the Crimson Fleet. And in the middle of this battle, they start getting attacked by terramorphs. And as a consequence, I have to deal with them also. So it adds this element of randomness and chance and a bunch of stuff that doesn't usually happen in the traditional vanilla experience, which is really cool. Adds that immersion, makes the game feel less samey and more alive. So before we dive a little bit deeper here into other combat changes, let me just say, if you're coming into this from the vanilla experience, you're gonna be a little bit shocked, okay? This makes the game significantly harder. You take a lot more damage in this game. You die a lot faster, usually maybe 2 or 3 shots and you're dead. So you have to play the game a lot more carefully. You gotta be way more strategic, way more meticulous, and if you're not careful, you're just gonna keep dying type of thing. And not only that, but the injury system in this mod is gnarly, man. You have to really plan ahead, which we're going to talk about, but just stashing a bunch of med packs or whatever isn't going to do it. You need a lot of different wound treatments and things like that, because you're constantly bleeding out and whatnot, getting infections. So if you don't come prepared or you don't know what you're going into, you might get frustrated, but it only takes a couple times of making that mistake for you to start planning ahead and knowing what to expect. But It's gnarly. The injury system is really hard. So I already mentioned that incoming damage is a lot more lethal, but outgoing damage, so damage that you deal to the enemies, is very, very spongy. A lot more in line with the vanilla than I would like. I don't like spongy combat. I tend to like a certain level of it, but the default mode that comes with the collection wasn't really to my liking, but I found that it was almost right. If you tweak it down just one level so that you deal a little bit more damage, it's a lot more enjoyable. Another thing to also keep in mind is that the collection uses another mod that's also made by the author that's called Human Damage. And this is basically a locational damage type of mod. Different body parts receive more damage from you and from the enemies. So what I'm just going to go ahead and mention then, especially if you're going to be playing with the default settings that the mod comes with, is that it really likes headshots, which wouldn't be a problem if it didn't have such a gnarly recoil system. Which, by the way, I frickin' love. It's probably one of my favorite aspects of the changes that it makes to the combat, but be aware, in theory it really likes headshots, but they're not easy, man. The recoil is gnarly. I personally love this because a big issue that Starfield has is that automatic weapons are just way too overpowered. It's almost like there's no reason to use semi-auto fire in this game at all. Now there really is. Actually, most of the time I'm not using automatic weapons just because the recoil is so harsh. What I usually found for my playthroughs is that I ended up using automatic weapons for indoor situations, more of that close quarter, a lot of enemies at once type of situations, which is, usually when you should in theory be using it. And then when you're fighting enemies from a distance or in a more open environment, I tend to almost always be using semi-automatic weapons, which is very cool because it makes everything relevant and automatic weapons aren't as overpowered. I'm just letting you know, especially if you've never used recoil mods, when you first boot up the game and play it, you're going to have a really hard time. But I promise you'll get used to it and eventually you're going to see that this makes the game way more fun. It's not even a matter of realism. It's not even so much about that. There's an aspect of that, but it just makes everything feel more balanced by having that in place, and it makes the game more challenging. So just before wrapping up the subject of combat changes, I'm going to go ahead and make two criticisms. There are two things that I did not like about the combat. Number one, shotguns really suck, and I like playing with shotguns. The second thing I'll mention is that rocket launchers are just absolutely out of control. They are so freaking powerful that it kind of really makes things less enjoyable. If you're not playing the game with weighted ammunition on, you could easily cheese your entire playthrough just with rocket launchers and you would have no fun. So my recommendation is don't even use them or use them very sparingly. You're probably going to want to use them and have them for mechanical enemies, right? For turrets and robots. Those enemies are really strong and spongy, then you can pull out the rocket launchers. But the enemies that are also using rocket launchers are a pain to deal with because they're just sniping you from across the map and they don't even have to hit you because if it hits the floor or a wall near you, it already deals a ton of damage. So it was really frustrating to deal with that. I didn't enjoy it. Yes, to a degree, it does make the game, a lot more challenging in its own right. So if you're into the game just being overall more challenging, sure, they make the game harder, but it's not harder in a way that I like. With that said though, they're fairly rare. It's very rare that an enemy will actually be using that. You're probably going to usually find, from an entire base, one of them will have a rocket launcher and maybe usually is like the boss enemy that you're trying to kill, right? One of them will have it and will be a pain to deal with. So the way to handle this is if you do spot an enemy that is using a rocket launcher, you need to either snipe him or make him a priority in some way, or you need to just keep tabs on him and try not to cross his line of sight. You have to always know where he is, which again, to be fair, in a way it does make the game more challenging, right? You have to always be accounting for this one enemy that's just raising hell from a distance and you gotta prioritize that enemy or always know where he is to be behind a wall where it's out of that line of sight. I don't like that, but it's not like it ruins the game or breaks it. It's just annoying. Also, just to be aware, the collection does use Serenity of Stars, which if you don't know, it's a gameplay overhaul that changes a bunch of stuff, like a whole list. I'll just put it on the screen, but mainly what it does is it makes the game unleveled. So be aware of that. It changes attachments and the ammo system of the game, so it's more in line with how Fallout works and a bunch of other stuff. So what else is good about Melius? Well, the economy. Boy, the economy is a lot more fun and a lot more well done. If you've been subbed to this channel for any length of time really, you probably know that my biggest grievance with Starfield is the economy. It's just way too easy. Credits are way too abundant. There's never a struggle. You never have to prioritize anything. There's just too much money. It's too easy. The economy here feels a lot more challenging because of some of the elements that we already mentioned and some of the ones that we're still to cover. Credits just don't come by as easily, and you find yourself constantly in these situations where you're having to prioritize or make executive decisions about, do I really need this? Do I not need this? Because if you don't have enough money for supplies like food, water, or med packs or different medicines in general, you're going to find yourself in a really annoying situation. So you have a lot of drags on the economy constantly, and you're always out of money, which is cool because you end up doing a lot of side quests. A problem that I've always had with Starfield is that because the economy is so easy, you don't find yourself in positions where you're just kind of wandering. You know, a big complaint that people in general had about this game is that it's just kind of samey. You're following that one storyline and you're not really getting lost in the game. And the truth is that most people probably haven't seen half of what the game has to offer. And frankly, that's not the player's fault. It's because Bethesda and the game itself has never really given you a reason to explore. There's no apparent need. But the game is, in fact, just like any other of their games, littered with side quests and littered with a lot of interesting stuff to do. You just don't do it because you're never broke, so there's no need. With this fix in the economy, you will find yourself constantly looking for different things to do, visiting planets just to try to make some money because you need to refill your ship and that has a cost. Maybe you need food, maybe you need supplies. So you end up getting lost in the world a lot more often, which I think is where Bethesda games shine. When you're just going from point A to point B and just doing like fetch quests or just, you know, finish the objective, come back and turn in the mission, get paid, and you just keep doing that, it loses a lot of its potential magic. A lot of the magic comes from getting lost in the world, and there's a reason to do that now. And a lot of times, especially if you're playing with all the systems on, like the fuel system, you will be forced because you won't have enough fuel to get to the next system if you didn't plan well. So you're going to end up in some random planet looking for somebody that sells it or looking for helium. So those situations will happen a lot more often, and you're going to see more of what the game had to offer initially. There is a lot there. It's just hidden, and there's no reason to see it, unfortunately. Again, like I had mentioned before, the game is super lethal. So you're going to be stacking up on those med packs and those emergency kits and all that, or the trauma packs. You're going to want to buy them every opportunity that you have. You're going to really spend all your money on that. And the issue isn't even the money. The issue is that the seller runs out of them. You're also going to want a lot of different medications in general, like I said, because you get lacerations when you get shot, so your character bleeds out. You get infections. You get all these different afflictions from the Deadly Hazards mod as well, and you need to have a lot of supplies in general, so your money's usually going towards that constantly. Another fun thing is that enemies can now board your ship. A lot of you are probably familiar with this mod, but if you're not, it's really cool. You can get raided. So somebody could technically dock your ship, or if you dock their ship, they can just enter your ship and try to take it over, which is really fun. So another mod that this collection uses that you really need to be aware of, on top of what I mentioned already, which is that fueling system. You should probably read into that and see how it works, because, or you can just disable it, but it's a lot of fun. You just got to understand how it works. It's a lot more well done than Starvival in that aspect. I find that the fueling system for Starvival is just way too complicated. This is more streamlined. It's easier, but you got to be aware of it. Otherwise, you're going to travel to another system and then not have enough fuel to come back. And then you're going to be in a really annoying situation where you're just like scavenging for helium and stuff. So avoid that, be aware of it. But if it does happen, you can disable it. The other thing you need to be aware of is that it uses Real O2, which is another mod that manages your oxygen. It reworks the oxygen system in the game, and it makes it a lot more challenging. So there are planets now that, you know, they deplete your oxygen over time. You go through your reserves and you start asphyxiating and you just die. So you need to carry reserves with you, which is another, you know, part of that logistical planning aspect, which the collection is really going for, which I'm a big fan of. Moving on, it also uses the Star UI suite of mods, which I can't play the game without them at this point, honestly. It just makes the UI look a lot nicer. You can probably see from my gameplay. It's easier to see things at a glance. It's more organized. It looks better. Don't know why Bethesda didn't just make it this way, but this is very, very welcome. Probably one of my favorite suite of mods in general. Next up here, continuing on that trend of making the game more hazardous and hardcore in general, it uses deadly hazards, which is also a very famous mod. I'm assuming most of you are familiar with it, but if you're not, essentially what it does is it reworks the hazard system of the game. It makes it a lot more challenging, way more immersive, and you have to actually kind of plan around it type of thing. It also uses gore field, which I have disabled because YouTube can be annoying with that stuff, but it makes the game a lot more bloody and a lot more gory. If you don't like it, you can turn it off. And then it also adds a lot of things that you would probably expect, right? It adds new armors, it adds new weapons, it makes the game look a lot nicer. The lighting and the shading in this game just looks beautiful. It adds certain details, like it changes the appearance of the glass on the helmets to look a lot more realistic and immersive. I love the way that it looks in general. Graphically speaking, it's not the best I've seen the game. I've seen the game look nicer from a graphic fidelity type of perspective, but the lighting and the shading is the nicest I've ever seen. It looks very, very good. So in total here, like I had mentioned before, MO2 says that it uses just under 400 mods, which is not the biggest list I've ever played. It's actually pretty focused on what it's trying to do, but it's still a lot of mods. So you're probably going to want Nexus Premium just so you don't have to individually download the mods one by one. Now granted, you could. It's not as big as some of the Skyrim lists that sometimes we cover on this channel, like Lorem or Novus, that use thousands. That one you really need it. You probably can get away without needing that here, but maybe you'll want it just for ease of use. And finally, what I'll mention, it does say on their page that it does require the Shattered Space DLC. Most of these collections will need that because a lot of mods now use it, so just be aware. You need the DLC to be able to play this. So again, there's a lot more mods that we didn't cover on an individual basis. There are other changes that these also make to the game, but again, it's 400, we can't do that. So hopefully this gives you a summary and at least gives you a vision of what it is that it's trying to do with the game, in what direction it's trying to take it. I would say that if you're looking for a collection that just adds a lot more to the game and it's not as focused as this one is and just does more, Gate to the Stars tends to be my favorite one for the general public, I guess. My recommendation of a collection for the mass audience of people would probably be Gate to the Stars. This one is more niche of a recommendation, but it is my favorite, so maybe you like it. As always, if you stuck with me till the very end, I thank you very much for your time, and if you did enjoy this video, please don't forget to hit the like button because it does help me a lot. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell notifications. Take care.